Okay, we're going to talk fur prices. As I record this, it is the 27th of November 2021, and I want to give you an update on my view on the fur market, where we're at, what things are looking like, the different factors that are influencing the price of fur and the overall market, and then we'll talk about individual species and what I expect. Again, these are my opinions, but I've been doing these updates for over a decade now, and it is a lot of this stuff is fairly predictable in terms of basically nobody knows what's going to happen, but if you're paying attention to what's going on, you can get a pretty good idea of where we're at right now. So basically, I mean, overall, not good. The market, I hate to be a pessimist, I hate to be a bearer of bad news, but I'm just going to be honest and lay it out there. This is this is going to be the worst fur market that most of us have seen. If you're, if you're 40 and under, I don't think you're going to have seen a fur market as bad as it's going to be this year. Is that going too far? Maybe. I mean, maybe I'm a little too pessimistic, but I just don't see. I see a lot of bad signs. I don't see very many good signs. So I'm going to run down those. First one, obviously, is the virus, the COVID-19, and this has affected so many different things. It has disrupted supply chains, so things don't get where they need to be on time. It has caused lockdowns, shutdowns. Our major consuming countries, fur consuming countries, like primarily China, complete lockdown in many parts of the country, where can't get out. People don't go out and shop. They aren't socializing. They aren't buying things, so they aren't buying fur coats. There there have been huge economic changes and economic impacts that I think we're yet to fully realize the fallout from. Maybe we'll get into that in a little bit, but this has changed everything. The whole supply and demand outlook had been pretty decent for us. The last few years, we've been looking at a a long period of low fur prices that for both wild fur and ranch fur, which has resulted in or was resulting in a lot of the ranch producers getting out of the business because they were losing money, which was going to shift the whole supply demand balance the other way. And we're going to see, or I was predicting 2020, we were going to see pretty much a bottom, and we were going to start to see fur prices come back and bounce off that bottom. And the wild fur producer was going to be in the driver's seat, basically, because the ranch production, which makes up, I think, about 80% of the worldwide consumption of fur, it was going to be underproducing what the market wanted. This was prior to COVID. This was before the whole world changed. And as a result, we went through the past year and a half, good parts of the past year and a half, nobody left their homes. And at least in places in the cities and in the countries where people do consume a lot of fur, people weren't leaving their homes, whether that was voluntary or involuntary. People weren't out shopping. People weren't buying a lot of stuff. They're buying stuff online, but the actual physical, clothing, things, fashion stuff, just wasn't being purchased. You sit at home in your sweatpants, right? And so that really changed things considerably when it came to the economy and just the whole supply chain for fur. So the virus threw things way out in a loop. Oil prices crashed. The oil producing countries whose economy really relied on oil prices were not in a very good buying position. That's started to come back. Oil's looking a little better now. But still, I just think that things are so out of whack that that's not going to have a big bearing on the market this year. There are new strains of the virus that are popping up that nobody really knows what's going to happen with those. in the U.S., we've done really well with the whole vaccination thing. Or a lot of people, the virus kind of burned its way through populations, and it is no longer as doesn't seem to be as much of a problem in terms of economic shutdowns. However, there is uh, there is some uncertainty as to what's going to happen with these new strains, and uh, we are kind of in a good position because we have a really good set of vaccines that were very effective at either combating the virus or preventing people from getting the virus, or if you get it, preventing hospitalization. Not all countries have that. From what I've heard, China's vaccines are not nearly as effective, and their method of combating the virus has been straight out lockdown. So, a couple of warning signals here. Probably the biggest one that came out a couple of weeks ago was Grunwald Fur and Wool Company, which is, I believe, the largest fur buyer uh, in the United States. They go out all throughout. They're in the Midwest. They're in Illinois, and they go throughout Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan. They go all over the place to buy fur. They have these different routes they run, and they stop at a parking lot, and people will drive in and give them their fur. They'll buy them out of the truck, and they've been doing this for decades. They just announced a couple weeks ago that they are canceling all of their buying routes until further notice. So, if you guys listen to the Trap House podcast with Justin Jett and Charlie Mashik from Hoosier Trapper Outdoors, Hoosier Trapper Supply, they just did an interview with Guy Grunwald, and it just came out a few days ago after this route shut down, and Guy gave some really good insight on what's going on in China. So Grunwald has shops in China where they sell tanned fur to garment manufacturers, and they have to ship it now to ship that fur to tanneries in other parts of Europe, of Asia, get that fur tanned, and then import it into China. Again, adds another step, adds more cost. But they got shops in China where every day they know how many furs they're selling. And Guy's latest report is basically stuff is not selling. These big cities in China that usually consume a lot of fur are shut down. People are not out and about. I think he mentioned the sales level for their tanned fur products is like 10% or less of a normal year. So that's a big deal, and that's why they stop their routes. If you bring coons into their shop or ship fur to them, they'll still give you a price on it, but they can't afford to drive around and buy fur because the prices are going to be that low. So that's a big warning signal. And if you also look at Fur Harvesters auction, they came out with a fur market forecast for the year, and of course, the last year the two major auctions they held were both online. They weren't able to do any in-person auctions because of travel restrictions. We're not sure what they're going to be able to do this year, hoping for in-person auctions, but this is just from the report. They're talking about certain items, and there's really some items that they're just saying, it's going to be hard to move, and we'll go over that in a little bit. But just as much as people try to minimize the bad news and try to be optimistic, especially the auction houses are always saying, oh, things are going to be fine. This is, we're doing much better. But when you actually look at the numbers, it's just, and you look at the outlook, it's not that good. So things could change. But right now, people aren't getting out. People aren't buying fur. The other big thing that's changed in the market is, well, let's talk ranch fur first. the the big overarching factors that I was thinking about in terms of where ranch where the whole supply and demand thing was going to play out was a lot of these ranch mink outfits were they've been losing money for years, and they were going to have to pelt out, get rid of their supply, right? We know that, and then we're going to start to see a comeback, and wild fur prices, wild fur producers were going to be essentially in the driver's seat because we're going to be able to, there's going to be a limited amount of fur in the market, and we're the ones that were going to have it, and prices were going to go up. Um, well, the ranch mink production has gone down considerably as a result of a combination of low prices, even pre-COVID, and number two, forced eradication of mink due to the virus. Any place where mink were found or detected to have COVID, they were those farms were quarantined, and they had to kill and incinerate all of the mink that were on premises. They weren't able to even sell any of those pelts. Uh, there were massive destruction of mink. It was just a terrible thing. And that reduced a bunch of supply. However, at the same time, there was a bunch of pelting out going on. And if, by all accounts, if you look at the major fur auction houses like Saga Furs in Finland and in Copenhagen, I think they're in Denmark. Um, they have they still have millions of mink pelts that they haven't sold and they can't sell for any decent price. So it's going to take time for those to clear out, and they're just not selling right now. So those prices, they came back a little bit, but I think we're going to see those prices go back down to last year's prices or even below. And there's going to be, it's sad because, even though the supply is lower, the demand has gone so much lower relative to supply that it's not enough. There's not enough people consuming fur to help these prices out right now. The other big factor in the U.S. and more of the domestic market is Canada Goose. And Canada Goose, after having pressure from animal rights groups, had announced recently that they are going to stop using all fur in their parkas. So that was again the market for our coyotes. That boosted the coyote market for basically the last decade. And those western heavy coyotes that were doing really well, all of a sudden the biggest buyer's gone. So I'm going to get into what I think is going to happen there. So with that, let's get into some individual species and some thoughts that I have on what prices might look like for them. And if you want to read some of this, I did just put up a fur market forecast on trappingtoday.com, and I'm going to use those notes to kind of put this together as I talk about these prices. So basically, coyote, there has been rumors that coyote prices there's still a lot of demand for coyotes. Don't worry, the price is going to be maintained and everything's going to be good even though Canada Goose is out of the market. There's a lot of other people who are making these coats. There's a lot of knockoffs and all of that. I personally don't buy it. I could be wrong, but I don't believe that these knockoff or imitation coats are going to survive with the big player out of the market. So what these Chinese companies were doing was they were looking at the Canada Goose parkas were selling for like $800, $1,000 with the coyote fur lined hoods, the trim on the hoods, and they're really fashionable. I mean, you go out in the cities and like traveling, you could see people with these coats. I was like, wow, I couldn't believe how many people were wearing these coats. It was pretty cool. Well, then Chinese companies see that and say, oh, we need to, we could sell those for like half the price and make a bunch of money. And so they were going in and competing for those coyote pelts to make those knockoff coats for cheaper. and they were selling lots of them to people who said, man, I can't afford the Canada Goose model, but I can get this cheaper version for uh, a lot more affordable price, and it looks just as good. And so they were doing that. But the fact is that it took one big player in that market to get that fashion trend going. And if that fashion trend goes away, there's going to be no incentive for these other companies. The Chinese or other knockoffs were not doing the marketing, the advertising, the trend setting, all the things that you need to do to build a brand and build a fashion to get people to want to wear those things. And so when the leader of a fashion trend goes away, it's very likely that whole part of the market's just going to fall apart. That's my opinion. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But I really think we may see for the first couple of months of fur selling this year, we may continue to see $70 to $100 for those Western heavy coyote pelts. Those are, those are the best ones. Those Western heavy coyotes have they're silky, prime, good color, everything. That's what the buyers want. So we had in some of those really good fur harvesters auctions where prices were doing really well, those Western heavy coyotes were selling out. They were up averaging like $100. There's all kinds of buyers getting into the fray, and the people those sold out, they were off the auction block, and then the lower quality skins came up, and everybody that was left that had been bidding and couldn't get what they wanted, they were paying more for those eastern coyotes and the ones that were slightly damaged or grade 2 or whatever. So that was always helping elevate the price of the lower quality ones. Last year, I think we had some pretty good auctions with those eastern coyotes. I think that's over. The days of $35 to $45 averages for those, I think, is done. So I think what we're going to see instead is probably $15, $20 for those, maybe $25 for the eastern coyotes. The western coyotes, they could, depending on whether Canada Goose is going to be in the market this season, to buy some before they completely phase things out. That could help. You could see some early really good prices. You could also see some people speculating, some buyers that are speculating, and then maybe pay $70, $80, $90, and they may get caught later in the season with a bunch of fur that nobody wants. So those prices may drop pretty quick, and I think the Western Coyotes were maybe $50, $60. Maybe even less than that. I'm just throwing that out there, but the Easterns are going to be low, and those Southern Coyotes in the Midwest, maybe $10, $15. Maybe some people might not even want to buy them. So that's what I'm thinking. Let's move on to muskrats. The muskrats are maybe a little bit of a less dark, a little bit of a brighter spot. Muskrats are an interesting item because if you're just looking for a something that looks similar to muskrat, and you want you're just looking for a fur and you don't really care specifically what it exactly is, right now you're going to buy a mink pelt because you can get the most square inches per dollar you spend, and they're going to be uniform. They're going to be the right size, same color, same quality, nice even lots and all that. But if you want muskrat, there's only a limited number of muskrat available to choose from. And that's for a couple of reasons. One, for the last 40, 50, 60 years, muskrat populations have been declining throughout the United States. So we don't produce near the number of rats that we used to. And two, of course, the low prices for everything has fewer trappers out there. And so just the rat supply is fairly limited. And there are a few buyers out there that use muskrat pelts exclusively. I think one of them is for liners on the inside of coats, and those buyers are going to want rats. And I think with the limited supply, as long as they have a somewhat decent market, the demand was pretty good last season, and if that continues, I think we could see some pretty decent prices continuing for rats. I mean, $3.50, $4, maybe some $5 averages, depending on where you're at in the country. And I personally, I'm thinking early on would be the best time to sell these because they may drop in price throughout the season, depending on how things shake up. But rats should be somewhat decent relative to the rest of the market. Now we get a little bit of good news in. Let's go to the really bad news. Raccoon. The vast majority of raccoon pelts right now, I don't think there's any market for at all. Even like Guy Grunwald buys more coons than anybody else, and he said there's raccoons that last year he was paying a couple of bucks for. He could get you could give him those pelts right now for free, and he'd lose money on them. That's where the market is. And so if you have the best quality coons, the right size, really big coons, perfectly prime, nice white hides, caught just in the perfect time season, no damage, you might get 10 or 15 bucks for them. But for the most part, anything that's not that is going to be very hard to sell. Maybe a couple bucks, $1, $2, $3 maybe lucky to get 5, but a lot of stuff you're just not going to find a buyer. There's not going to be a market for it until a lot of this stuff gets cleared out, till things start moving in China again, and inventory gets cleared out. There's tons of raccoon on the market right now that's been bought from trappers and hasn't sold, and is just sitting there waiting for a buyer. So I wouldn't get my hopes up at all with coon. It's probably the most disappointing item out there. Beaver, very, very going to be very difficult to sell as well. So you got the two markets there. You've got the coat market / kind of like small scale hats, mitts, blankets. More of a niche type market for beaver. There isn't really a coat market like there used to be. The problem with beaver is it takes so much labor to process a beaver pelt. So the coats that were popular for some time were beavers that were tanned, plucked, sheared, and dyed. And to do all that to a beaver pelt, it really costs a great deal of labor and time, and it doesn't make sense right now in the current market environment. So a lot of the beaver, if you have really good quality beaver, I think your best bet is to try to sell them to someone who is a small scale furrier who has projects that they work on. They might make blankets for people, beaver blankets, pillows, mitts, gauntlets. The beaver makes a really, really nice gauntlet, and that might be where you can get your best price. If you just send them on the overall fur market, there are a few of the better quality beavers that are gonna sell well. The best sections, places like where I am in Maine, we have a really good beaver, and then areas in Canada have a really good beaver. Quebec, parts of Ontario have a really good beaver. Alaska, decent, not quite so good in color, but primeness. Some of those will sell really well, but then it's going to drop off to very little. The other market, the low-end market, is the hatter market. Those pelts are ground up into felt to make Stetson cowboy hats and similar things. That has always put a floor on the market. I am continuing to wonder when that's going to run its course and that market's going to be saturated. It hasn't yet, but it seems to have shown potential signs of weakening. So I wonder about that. Um, it probably most beaver are gonna average $10 on overall. I think that's pretty safe, but you may, boy, some in some cases they might be hard to sell, or they might be lower than that. The good news about the low beaver prices is not a lot of people are harvesting them, and thus you have a really good castor market. That continues. There's still really good demand for castor. Far as I know, that has not subsided. Castor has been averaging about $100 a pound for fully dried, and I think that's going to continue. I think until further notice that those strong castor prices are going to continue. So take advantage of that if you need to harvest beaver. Move on to otter. Otter is slow and steady. So we're all kind of, a lot of us are used to the, those years when we had like $100 otters. Those were a few really good years, but they didn't last. And we're kind of getting used to a new baseline. So otter are moving, but they're moving at $15 or $20, maybe 25. If you have a really good one, you might possibly get 30. But for the most part, I'd say around $20 average on otters is what you can expect. You will be able to sell them, but the market's not what it was before. Martin and fisher, for those of you in northern places where you can catch martin and or fisher, those are going to be pretty good, I think. The Fur Harvesters has been announcing that they're getting a lot of calls. There's a lot of demand for martin and fisher, probably more so martin, but they've been able to sell them. People are looking for them. Um, the the those Alaskan type martin, there were times when they were averaging $100. I don't think we're going to see that, but they've also been as low as $30 recently. I think we could see, around the $60 range for those northern Canadian and Alaskan martin, and the lower 48, like the Northeast, maybe $30. Maybe we'll see $30 for ours, and maybe 25 or 30 for those Western Rocky Mountain lower 48 martin. Fisher maybe around $30 optimistically. A lot of them have been going for around 20 or so, 20, 25. I think we could see $30 fisher pretty easily if this demand actually pans out. Bobcat's probably going to be pretty similar to coyotes in the sense that there is a limited upper end demand in the market. Uh, Bobcat Higher end Bobcat pelts are a fashion item. White bellies with lots of spots, those Western Bobcats are going to be the best ones. They're going to sell for the highest averages. And I think, the $500 Bobcat is going to be a thing of the past for an average. But you could see some Bobcat collections averaging $300 to $400. Um, it could be as low as 100. 150 might be a conservative number just based on the state of the overall market. Um, you could do well if you have a really, really good cat, but I think most Western cats, we may see that 100, 150 average. I'm just guessing on that. That could vary a lot. The rest of the Bobcats ranging probably between $30 and $60. There's been pretty decent demand for the low to middle grade Bobcats recently, so hopefully that continues. And $30 to $60 is probably a pretty safe range, like 30 for the deep south cats and 60 for something you might see in New England or most of Canada, like eastern Canada. Fox, terrible. Very little demand for red fox or gray fox. There's no fashion trend there, and just nobody seems interested in them. You might maybe $10 average on them, maybe. Skunks, yeah, probably pretty consistently $5. Skunk are something that always seems to sell a little bit. They're a novelty. People like to hang them on the wall and that sort of thing. So Those are the major items. I don't really want to go into all of the other minor things because they're probably going to be either very hard to sell or they're not going to have varied much from last year's prices. But overall, I'm sorry to report it's going to be a tough market, but that's my prediction. I hope I'm wrong. I hope things change, but I think things are going to get worse before they get better. Um, let's look at the bright side. What I see is that this low market could present some opportunities because it's going to force those of us who either want to keep trapping or have to keep trapping for various reasons to find alternative markets, and it's going to force us to do something that is usually very difficult and we wouldn't put the effort into otherwise, but that is finding another place to sell your fur or adding value to your fur to get it sold. So that might mean getting it tanned and selling tan furs at a local trading post or craft fairs. It might mean learning to sew and making fur items, getting somebody to sew your furs for you, like my friend Josh Fisher, Fisher Furs up in Fairbanks, Alaska, does a great job sewing hats and mitts. Trying to work on some other stuff. I'm trying to get him to make me some mucklucks out of otter pelts. Try that out, but it's going to force us to do different things and try to create alternative markets. And I think that's the one of the bright spots that we're going to see with these low fur prices. I hope we come out of this better marketers and hopefully with some other options. So with that, guys, I hope that wasn't too much of a downer. If you got any questions, just feel free to let me know and I'll try to answer them best I can. And if there's anything major changing, I will provide another update. But we probably won't know too much for a little while here because the market's going to take some time. If there are any changes, it's going to take some time for them to develop. So anyway, hope that helps and take care.